And so here's the thing. I actually want to defend liberals a little bit on this. It is perfectly fine to have an ideology. It is right and good to have an ideology. I am an ideologue. What I mean by ideologue is that I have a set of principles that I think are tested by time and experience and knowledge and reading and education. They're always open to correction or falsification, but they basically boil down to my principles about how we should think about public policy or go forth in the land and do good things, right? I value individual liberty, I value limited government. These are my ideological principles. But I also think they're fairly well confirmed by reading of history and all of the rest. There's nothing wrong with having a checklist of principles, a number of questions you ask about a new policy or a problem. Will it expand freedom? Will it constrain freedom? Will it hit the national debt? Will it not hit? You know, these are all ideological questions. They're all perfectly legitimate questions, whether you're a liberal or conservative. The difference is that conservatives are open about it. You know, this is one of these great myths that you get out there, that conservatives are the closed-minded people. But look, I come from a magazine, National Review, that has been arguing about conservative dogma and changing positions on conservative dogma for over 50 years. Conservatives are constantly arguing between libertarians and conservatives, between social conservatives and social libertines. You know, you go down the list. We're constantly arguing about where the trade-offs are between freedom and virtue, liberty and order. And that line is constantly moving depending upon where reality is. And we love to have these arguments. I mean, I am a true conservative geek. You know, I hang out with people who wear their favorite philosophers on their ties. You know, I'm a level 9 Hayekian, that kind of thing, you know. And so let me give you some examples of how sort of liberals reject the idea that they have an ideology. I don't know if you guys followed it. There's this group called No Labels. Okay, now, it was founded by Michael Bloomberg on the weird thought that an incredibly annoying, pushy, 5'0" Jewish guy from New York City could somehow become president of the United States if he could just convince everybody to give up labels. But they claim the argument is a little more sophisticated than that. And it's true. I have never met a conservative who said, don't label me, you know, or I don't believe in labels. You hear this all the time from liberals when you say, well, that sounds like a really liberal idea or a socialist idea. Hey, man, don't label me, right? And so what, you know, or in politics, you see these Democrats come to Washington, Hillary Clinton's done this, Al Gore's done this, Barack Obama's done this, where they say one version or another of, why do we have to have all these ideological squabbles? Why do we have to have all of these philosophical debates? Why can't we just simply do the work that the American people sent us here to do? Right? Now, you never hear conservatives say that for the most part. And it's funny, I have in all of my time, and I've been following politics for a long time. I think I started reading the New Republic when I was 12 because I'm that cool. And I have never heard a liberal say, you know, why can't we move beyond these political arguments? Why can't we get past this philosophical divide? You know, for the sake of bipartisanship, I'm going to abandon all of my principles and agree with you. Right? People only say these sorts of things when they want you to shut up and get with their program. The second you hear someone say the time for debate is over, they're not saying, I lost, I'll do what you say. They're saying, you lost, shut up, get in line. And it's a real problem in a democracy, because a democracy is supposed to be about disagreement, not about agreement. You know, I'll give you some sort of basic one. Violence never solved anything. Okay, now this drives me crazy, because it turns out that violence is actually pretty useful in some situations. Particularly violent situations. And leaving aside the fact we ended the Holocaust and freed the slaves, which seems like a pretty good solution, right? Look at it at the most basic level, right? You have someone, you know, someone's robbing a liquor store, beating up an old lady, and a cop sees it, and he's about to run over and put a stop to it, and he draws his gun, and then he has an epiphany of wisdom. He says, wait a second, this thing is useless, and throws it away, because violence can't solve anything, right? The simple fact is that, you know, violence is often the last resort in terribly violent situations. But it's not just, you know, I'm not just trying to do logic chopping. we get this idea that violence never solved anything largely from Gandhi. A little bit from Thoreau, a little bit from Jesus, obviously, but Jesus commanded his followers to carry swords. So let's not get crazy about that. It was Gandhi who really put this thing forward. And it's worth pointing out that the reason he talked about nonviolence and all that is because he thought it would work. He always said that he understood that it would work against the British. And whatever you think about British imperialism, and there were a lot of bad things that went with it and all the rest, at the end of the day, the British have fairly decent, rightly formed consciousnesses, and they're open to moral suasion. And that's why it worked. It's quite telling that he never told the Nazis violence never solved anything. Right? He told the British, and they lead up to World War II, that what they should do is surrender to the Nazis. He said, give up your homes, give up your beautiful island, but keep your principles. His advice to the Jews of Nazi Germany was, commit mass suicide, because that'll really show them, right? And he was asked about this after the war, and he never retracted about it. Now, my last name being Goldberg, you might realize I don't think this is the most efficacious public policy proposal. But wherever you come down on issues of war and peace and law and crime and all of the rest, the fact is that when people say violence never solved anything, they are trying to advance a really ideological argument without being open and honest about the ideological argument that they're making. They're trying to steal bases without actually putting forward arguments in the process. Joe Biden, during the argument about gun control, said a lot of things, right? He says a lot of things. Give him time, it'll just start shouting, "Get these squirrels off of me." But Joe Biden said about gun control, if it saves just one life, it's worth it, right? Now, if you've read Tom Sowell, you know that this is crazy talk. This is not how you do public policy. If a law is justified by saving a single life, then the speed limit has to be 5 miles an hour, right? We all have to walk around with bike helmets and giant sumo suits, right? It's an absolutely terrible, horrible thing, and I'm not trying to make light of it or anything like that, but OSHA reports, and it's an absolute fact, that somewhere between a half dozen and a dozen little kids, toddlers, drown every year in buckets in their backyards. It's a terrible thing. As a father, it just horrifies me. At the same time, I would not argue that therefore we must have a mandated federal policy of putting holes in all buckets. Because at the end of it, you just can't live life that way, And so I'm supposed to talk about, sorry I'm drinking so much water. I smoked an enormous amount of pot before I got here. I get crazy dry mouth, and yeah, it's funny. I've been using that joke for years in lots of places to all sorts of different audiences, and this is the only place where it sounds plausible. So this speech was actually billed as this talk about liberal conformity and left-wing conformity. I should talk about that a little bit. How am I doing on time?
Just fine.
Okay, so so I go to a lot of college campuses, and usually, no offense to any of these fine, upstanding people here, the median age is a little lower. And one of the first things I always like to do, whatever I'm talking about, or at least, not maybe the first thing, somewhere after the pot jokes, is there's this idea, called a cliche, that there is something inherently rebellious about being liberal. And nowhere in America is that more true on college campuses, where there's this certain bravery on the cheap, wear it on your sleeve, I'm a progressive, I'm a liberal, and therefore I'm swimming against the tide, and I'm a different, I'm standing out, and I'm sticking it to the man and all that. And I always like to say, look, let me get this straight. I'm not counting Steve Hayward. Your professors are liberal, the administration is liberal, Hollywood is liberal, publishing is liberal, the mainstream media is liberal, the fashion industry is liberal, the music industry is liberal. And you think you're sticking it to the man by agreeing with them? And there is this idea that somehow, and it is so unbelievably widespread. It's why Barack Obama visited college campuses, more often than a Red Bull delivery truck. It's because he understood that he was tapping directly into that. And And it runs throughout the mainstream media. In Washington, it is amazing how many people I meet who are, you know, utterly predictable, cliched, hardwired, conventional liberals who somehow think that they are breaking from the pack by saying exactly what you expect of them. Another one that you find on college campuses a lot, and this is something I want to be consistent about this. When I was a young man, I made the exact same arguments. I wrote the same things. I've been consistent on this since I've been in public life. I hate youth politics. I think youth politics is the cheapest, shabbiest form of identity politics. You know, it is the idea. I also hate the idea of the greatest generation. No offense to the greatest generation guys in here, but the simple fact is, simply because you're the same age of some really heroic people who stormed Normandy Beach, means nothing to me. You know, what if you were in jail on D-Day? I'm supposed to say now, oh, you remember the greatest generation, you know. I believe in respecting your elders. I mean, that's a different thing. But this idea that somehow your age cohort in and of itself is something to be proud of, that something says something special about you, is just so unbelievably lame. And besides, there is an extremely well-established finding in the social science and psychological literature, and I've never had anybody disprove this, that there's an incredibly high correlation between youth and stupidity. In fact, when you are essentially 1 minute old, you are what neuroscientists call a complete frickin' moron. Right? You don't know how to dress, you don't know how to read, you don't know how to speak, you don't know how to think, you're soiling yourself. And it is only as time passes and you get older that you get over this condition. And yet, I will go on college campus after college campus where I will meet these kids who will tell me that simply because they're younger than me, they know more than me. And that somehow they deserve undue deference because they're kids. I remember in Hillary Clinton's It Takes a Village, and I'm one of the 6 conservatives in captivity who actually read that book. She said, some of the smartest theologians I've ever met have been 5-year-olds. Really? You know, it's like Aquinas, Augustine, Timmy. And I don't mean to belittle young people. I mean, first of all, as any older person in this room will attest, it's better to be young. It's more fun, it's more interesting, everything is new, you can actually have your first beer rather than your 10,000th. I mean, it's awesome to be young. And young people bring a lot of wonderful things to politics and to life. They bring youth and passion and energy and excitement and all that, and they should be celebrated for it. But what I just will not stand for is people who take undue pride, even though they have no accomplishments of their own, simply because they were born in a specific year. I mean, at least there's an argument about identity politics for women and for blacks and for Asians and for Jews. You can make an argument. I'm not a fan of identity politics of any kind. But everybody who's not dead was young, and everybody who is dead was young. Everyone is young. It is the common denominator of humanity.